So this is a project that's been weighing on my mind for a while now. I guess, so to speak, to be therapeutic for myself, mostly just to, I guess, gain some sort of reassurance that I'm not losing my goddamn mind, which I'm sure happens to a lot of psychonauts out there when they reach certain stages in this journey. And I do know that there's a significant demographic of people out there who do like to read and listen to trip reports as well. So hopefully this will be of some service to them. On that point, let me go ahead and say that nothing I'm going to say in any of these videos is going to be anything new or innovative or especially insightful. But I feel like the way in which I myself am going to articulate these things will be useful to someone out there, perhaps persons who are more like myself. Because no amount of reading trip reports and listening to them, and even no amount of previous psychedelic experiences can ever fully prepare you for what it's like to have the firsthand experience itself, no matter how many similarities there are between the experiences. Um, no amount of reading Eastern literature or meditation or any of those things is going to prepare you for what the chemicals have to communicate to you specifically. And I feel like, while there was a lot of good information out there about trips and what to expect on these substances, I feel like if someone out there had articulated these things in the way that I'm going to in these series of videos, it would have been more helpful to someone like me to not only to help better prepare for the experiences themselves, but also how to better integrate them into normal life and into your psychological health. Again, just for reassurance that we're not losing our goddamn minds as we're taking these things and reaching greater and greater heights of insight with them, I suppose. But be that as it may, here goes nothing, because I know oftentimes when we embark on social media projects, we kind of want to wait until everything's exactly perfect before we begin the project, but that doesn't exist, and the longer you try to make things perfect, really you just end up wasting time. So just gonna dive right into it and see how this goes. So this journey for me started actually quite a while back now, in the summer of 2007. I had just recently moved back home to Georgia from New York, where I lived for a few years. And during that time in New York, and away from my previous spheres of social influence, I guess you could say I sort of became more open-minded and eventually deconverted from Christianity during that time. All my life up to that point, I had been a very conservative, evangelical type of Christian, mostly Southern Baptist, spent a few years thereafter in Pentecostalism, and then finished out the tenure of Christianity in Seventh-day Adventism. But that's another story for another day. Anyway, so upon moving back home with this new void in my life, having departed from Christianity, which up to that point had taken up most of my life, I was trying to find solace in some new mode of spirituality, just trying to fill that new void in my life. So, Googling around and talking around with friends and stuff, I eventually kind of came across various tenets of New Age woo-woo, and naturally that's gonna, through one path or another, that's gonna make you come across psychedelics for the use of shamanistic purposes. And me still kind of having some of the tendencies of a good old Christian boy inside of me, I was like, well, I'm curious to try this stuff, but I don't want to do anything illegal. So I start Googling, legal psychedelics, which at the time, your number one result was going to be Salvia Divinorum, as this was back before Miley Cyrus ruined it for everybody by putting it on the radar of all the Karens around the world. But that too is another story for another day. So I had talked with my brother because he had more experience with psychedelics and psychoactive substances than I did at this point. I held out in Christianity a little longer than he did. He kind of gave up on it a few years earlier. So he had more experience in worldly things, as you might say. Asked him if he had ever heard of salvia. He hadn't heard of it, so he did his own research on it and decided to order some. He and my sisters and their friends all tried it and gave me their trip reports, and I guess that kind of helped psych me up to embark on it myself. So he offered me some and tried to give me some brief instructions on how to do it. We just smoked it out of a weed pipe, the typical glass pipe that has the swirly tie-dye psychedelic type of color patterns on it, which was significant for the trip, as we'll get into. So I loaded up a bowl of that, and you had to light it with a torch lighter at the time, I remember. So his bedroom was right behind the living room. I come into the living room, sit down at the coffee table in front of the TV, which was not on. And I fire it up and take in one good hit, and apparently that was enough. In the first few seconds, I didn't feel anything, so I'm kind of wondering, all right, we need to hit this again. And then boom. And as you'll learn, or as you experience psychonauts out there already know, each substance kind of comes with its own flavor, so to speak, in all aspects, not just the literal flavor as in the taste on your tongue and the smell in your nostrils, but the feelings of it, the way in which the come on happens, and then the actual experience and the way it comes down. Some substances start with a body high first, and then it works its way up to your brain. This one definitely, like, just immediately, like, woo, like, very intense tingles, like when you get a good weed high, but this didn't take as long as a weed high. This was, like, immediately, like, woo. And then from my head, it started to spread out through the rest of my body. And even the way in which different substances tingle kind of has almost like its own vibration or frequency, you'll start to notice as you get more experience with these things. So the vibrations start to intensify, and then it starts to take over my vision. And I'm standing there looking at the pipe because I'm still deliberating on, like, should I hit it again or should we let this play out? Good thing I just decided to let it play out. Because the colors on the pipe, like I said, they were very much psychedelic colors like you might associate with a lot of hippie imagery from back in the 60s, a lot of swirly tie-dye looking patterns with a lot of bright warm colors, like a lot of oranges, a lot of hot neon pinks, a lot of yellows with maybe little bits of blue or green in between, a lot of shapes that look like peacock feathers or teardrops or water droplets. So that bled out off of the pipe onto my hand, onto the floor, onto everything in the room. Now everything in the living room still maintained its shape as it does here in the sober world, but now the color patterns were all this psychedelic color imagery. And so I turned to look at the television, and I noticed that it's a little strange to describe, but it's like the individual cells, and I know a television doesn't have cells, but in this vision, it's like it had little cells the same way any organism does, and each of the individual cells on the TV like blew up and enlarged and looked like the tips of peacock feathers. So I could still make out the shape of the TV. It was still the same size and everything, but now, like, the little molecules or whatever that were composing the TV, like, enlarged, yet at the same time maintained the same number, if that makes any sense. Of course it doesn't, because you'll find on these substances, logic kind of goes out the window in these experiences, but it's like the cells magnified so that I could see them and see how they look like the tips of peacock feathers, but there were still the same number of cells on the TV, but the TV didn't enlarge in size. Go figure. Anyway, I just remember remarking to myself, because in this trip, and again, for those of you who aren't well experienced with psychedelics, you'll find that various substances have various effects on how much of your ego can be integrated into the trip. You know, like Joe Rogan and Terrence McKenna, they'll make the remark that, like, man, on DMT, you know, your ego is completely intact, but other substances change who you are, like such as alcohol or weed or acid and shrooms. They kind of tweak with your personality a little bit, and they lower inhibition. So even your very thought process is kind of tweaked in those experiences. But what I found personally on Salvia was, yeah, your ego is pretty much intact. You're still the you that you are when you're sober, and how you react to these things and interpret the visions that you're seeing. And I just remember remarking to myself, like, oh, okay, I get it. This is what it was all about back in the 60s, with all the psychedelic imagery and the artwork that hippies used and all this new agey stuff. Like, just suddenly it all made sense. Like, oh, this is what, and I mean, we already knew these things. These were all common sense things. We knew that the hippie movement in the 60s wasn't heavily inspired by psychedelics, but now having firsthand experience with psychedelics, it's like, oh, they didn't just make it up, you know, and it wasn't just lightly inspired by psychedelics. Like, you actually literally see these kind of color patterns and shapes and everything that you see in hippie artwork is you see on, or at least I saw on Salvia. So I'm just like, oh, cool, okay, I get it. This is what it was all about. It was also very reminiscent of, like, certain scenes out of the Beatles movie, with the Yellow Submarine, you know, when there's a lot of the cartoon scenes in that movie. Definitely reminded me of this part of the trip. So anyway, I lean past the TV and I look into the foyer where the entrance of the house is, and then go up to the stairs, up to the master bedroom, or into the dining room, or into the living room. And it's only like a 10 by 10 space, but I look at it and suddenly it elongates. And It looked almost like the hallway in a cathedral or a castle or in, university library. And it continued to elongate without end. Like I couldn't even see the other side where it's supposed to go into the dining room. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. All right. And so again, I look back at the pipe. I could still kind of make out my hand. My hand no longer had the psychedelic colors on it. And I could still kind of make out the pipe. And I'm like, all right, should I hit this again and see if something else happens? And apparently at this point, my brother had come out of his bedroom to check on me. And he had walked up behind me. And I could hear his voice. I haven't turned around to look at him yet. He's standing right behind me. And apparently he thought I hadn't hit it yet because I'm just sitting there staring at the lighter. So he's trying to instruct me on how to hit it. You gotta hold the torch this way, and you gotta carve it and all this stuff. Clearly, definitely my brother. I could clearly, distinctly hear him plain English words. Everything was coherent about what he was saying. But I turn around to look at him, and he is Kermit the Frog. Still the same height as my brother, but very vividly I could sit there and stare at him and see his body form was Kermit the Frog. Go figure. But of course, there were always those rumors that Jim Henson would also partake, like Dr. Seuss and some of these other, children's authors who back in the day reached their height of notoriety in the 60s, that they were often influenced by psychedelics as well. So that kind of made sense. There's some things I've seen in the Muppet Show that kind of, like, oh yeah, that kind of looks like it might be influenced by psychedelics. So yeah, my brother was Kermit the Frog. And then standing right next to him was Rolf the dog, which if those of you out there, you've never seen the Muppet Show, he's that brown dog with the raspy voice that plays the piano. And, Kermit's mouth is moving, and my brother's voice, still exactly my brother's voice as it is when I'm sober, is coming out of his mouth, telling me how to hit the lighter and take a toke of salvia. But I'm just so amazed at what I'm seeing here that I'm not even registering the instructions he's giving me. Not that I needed to hit the pipe again anyway. And so I hold up the pipe to him for him to just take it from me and just show me what he's talking about as I'm sitting there amazed. I'm like, what the fuck? And instead of my brother, Rolf the dog, who's sitting next to him, reaches out and grabs the lighter and pulls his hand away. But of course, since he didn't actually exist, the lighter was still in my hand. And that phenomenon kind of shook me out of it and kind of brought me back to like, out of that amazement and just kind of like, oh, right, none of this is real. This is all just happening in my head. This is the salvia talking. But still, it was kind of, it was interesting. I think at that point, my brother kind of realized that I was already high and tripping. Must have been the look in my eyes or whatever. And I just remember him kind of snickering and walking off into the kitchen area. So I turned back and looked at the living room. Everything's still looking the way it did before with all the psychedelic colors everywhere and the peacock feathers on the TV and whatnot. And it's at this point, when you don't have any experience with psychedelics, there's often that anxiety of like, how long is this gonna last? What if I stay like this forever? Have I broken my brain? You start to, and that feeling never really goes away no matter how many psychedelics you do, but I think you get more accustomed to reminding yourself during the trip that like, this is only temporary, this will die off, don't worry, calm down. Don't give in to the anxiety because that will affect the trip. Anyway, this being my first ever psychedelic experience, I definitely had that anxiety start to come up like, how long is this gonna last? Like, what if this lasts forever? Well, I can't function in the world like this. And I remember, and this is definitely what I took away from this experience, I remember that if you focus, if you concentrate hard enough, you can will yourself out of these psychedelic experiences. Now, I'm not gonna say that's universally the case. It's probably not universally the case for everyone, and it's definitely not universally the case for every psychedelic experiences, because if you take a high intensity amount of a psychedelic, there's just going to be no willing yourself out of it, and the trip's just going to run its course. But this was, I guess, a manageable level of the Salvia Divinorum, Salvinorin A, or whatever it's called, the active ingredient in it. I guess this was a manageable level of it in my bloodstream to where I still had enough access to the logical parts of my mind where I was just like, all right, focus, and concentrate. And yeah, I kind of willed myself out of the trip zone. And I just remember all the psychedelic colors, kind of the way they bled off of the pipe and into everything, they kind of sucked back into the center point of my vision. And then I could see the sober world again. But overlaying on top of that were like these translucent, colorful auras. Like, it was very similar to like the heat that comes off of pavement, on road pavement on a hot day in the summer. It was very similar to that. It was like just waves of like it kind of looked like heat, but instead of being clear, it was very rainbow colored, emanating off of everything, emanating off of the TV and the table and the kitchen and whatnot. And it also, doing that kind of gave me a headache, maybe because I was resisting the effect of the drug, but I just remember like I had to deliberately maintain it. Like at any point, if I let go of this concentrated focus, it was just going to bleed back into the trip state. So I had to like, make a concerted effort to hold this focus into this semi-sober state of perception. And doing so kind of gave me a headache. But then I remember thinking like, okay, that was kind of cool. So that's psychedelics. That's salvia, and that's what the brain is capable of generating. Wow. All right, cool. And at that point, I got the munchies, as psychedelics are often known to trigger. So went to the kitchen, ate a bowl of cereal, and called it a day. And that was that for the first salvia experience. We did end up getting another batch a few months later, and my brother and the guy who was my brother-in-law at the time, those two guys, they decided to make their own concentrate, because like I said, this was back when salvia was legal. You could just buy it on the internet willy-nilly to your heart's content. And there were websites that were offering like, this is 5 times concentrate, and this is 20 times concentrate, and this is 30 times concentrate. And these two jokers, they decided to mess around and kind of make their own concentrate. They were going to try to use acetone and make their own 30 times concentrate for an even more potent dose. Honestly, they tested it out on me. They told me that they took it already, but the way they were laughing and snickering at me and really encouraging me to try it made me think they were just lying. They were just bullshitting me to try and get me to take it and be the guinea pig. So I smoked that shit, and I think they kind of ruined it. It definitely was not a 30-time concentrate. To me, it wasn't even as powerful as the previous experience I just described. What I do remember, though, is this was a lot more of a body high, and very intensely so. And it ended up being the same phenomenon that my brother described to me in his first salvia experience, which is that he said he saw this like vortex happening in the center point of his vision in his room, and it like snowballed, like almost kind of literally. It started out as a small point of like almost like a black hole, just this vortex of like gravity that pulled in, and it swirled, and as it swirled it got bigger, and it started like pulling in like energy or something, just pulling off vibrations from everything else in the room. And as this field of its gravitational pull swirled and got bigger and bigger and eventually reached his body, he could feel it like peeling layers off of his body. Not painfully, but he said it was a very, very strange experience. It was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. Again, it wasn't painful, it wasn't even uncomfortable, just like and being sucked into this vortex. So when I tried this alleged 30 times homemade concentrate of salvia a few months later, that was what I felt. I couldn't see it, but I definitely felt it. Like you can almost like feel the density of this ball in the center point of your vision, and then like it expands out and then it hits your body and like I would liken it to the sensation of like if you've ever had like electrolysis stimulation, like if you ever go to a massage therapist or a chiropractor or whoever, and they put the pads on you and then they do the electrolysis and the way it stimulates your muscles artificially. It was very similar to that kind of sensation, but like more like peeling off of you. And yeah, the sound actually, even though I didn't see anything, the sound also accompanies it, and it does sound very much like that, almost like a vacuum cleaner or something, like. And then after I was kind of over that sensation, like, okay, that was cool, this is what Jacob was talking about, but is this all there is? Is this what 30 times concentrate is? It's kind of dull. I closed my eyes, then I could see it on the back of my eyelids, which is, again, another phenomenon you'll find often accompanies psychedelics. Sometimes they may not be intense enough to provoke visuals with your eyes open, but once you close your eyes, it's like, holy shit, someone just opened the doors to Narnia here. And we're in a whole nother world, and that's what happened. I closed my eyes, like, boom, holy crap. And it was just like, I don't know, just colors blasting everywhere, swirling around, similar to my previous trip in the living room. But also, I could now see this vortex and see how it was spinning and pulling colors away from everything else towards itself. And as it did so, it was gradually getting bigger and bigger, and you could feel it growing in density. And I'm just like, oh, wow, okay. Wow, I wonder what that's all about. Again, there's no no evidence that any of these things are occurring, as you would say, objectively, outside of our own minds. But the experiences are so vivid that it leaves you to wonder. You know, like, wow, is that like, did I tap into some other dimensional portal or something like that? And that was that. So not a whole lot from these trips that was significant to my overall worldview and existential crisis, as my later psychedelic experiences would do. But I guess it was just a matter of being the gateway drug into psychedelics for me. This was where my journey started. It also showed me how powerful the mind is, what the mind is capable of generating. It is capable of generating imagery and sensory experiences that are every bit as vivid as when you are awake and sober. And then in many cases are indistinguishable from the two. And the only reason you know that the other world was not real is because you were under the influence of a drug. So yeah, that's what I have to take away from my Salvia experience. Thanks for watching.